Okay, hello.
Hi, I'm Evan,
I'm Aziz.
and we have some questions regarding union. I really enjoyed the picture, and I thought it was a good documentary. I'm from the United States, so it was also especially interesting for me. And I think that the observational style that's present in union is what works really well, and I think you get a sense of being right there, being part of the movement as it develops. I'm wondering how you came to the decision to shoot it in an like this observational way, and if there was ever any sort of temptation to have like a direct address to the audience from the characters.
Sure. I can also ask if there were temptations for other styles. One of the things that I think is important for us documentary filmmakers is to remind audiences that their nonfiction comes in all sorts of forms, all sorts of cinematic and creative forms, and that these choices are really deliberate. So thank you so much for that question. Yeah, we made a decision pretty early, but not necessarily decisively, that probably this film would be best told, the story would be best told in the observational mode. And that has to do with what we understood the core of the film to be. Obviously, on first glance, the film is about this unionization struggle. It's about the behemoth that Amazon has become and the virulent unionism in the United States. And also about Amazon as a workplace that's defining the global economy. So if we wanted to sort of dive into the kind of technicalities and histories of that and really think about Amazon as a company or the global supply chain as a form of late capitalism, there could have been other options for us, and we considered them. Should we I don't think we were ever interested in doing direct address, where Steve and I are not the kind of filmmakers that sort of do very standard conventional talking head documentaries. We're creative filmmakers who really are interested in aesthetic experience, but we certainly entertain the possibility that maybe we needed a diffuse form where we, traveled a little bit, gave a kind of more visual indicators of the kind of scale of this company and how it operates. But very early on, we understood that beneath that sort of topic sentence, there was a much more interesting story and set of themes that have to do with organizing itself, the way in which people become political and struggle, the decision of a new generation of working class people to take on their employer in a cultural as well as economic climate that's really hostile to the idea that ordinary people have power. And we were so taken at almost every moment, even before we started shooting, with what we witnessed among these organizers, a very small group of people that were at first gathering on Zoom or at work during their shifts, and then later at this tent, really kind of just encouraging each other and becoming politically motivated together to figure out how to have power. And for us, the observational mode, which sometimes gets called the cinema verite mode, is a really beautiful way to try and capture that precisely because it can exist outside of language. It's not, it's not that interesting to just say that fact. It's much more interesting to witness real people feel their way into a kind of sense of belonging to something collective, and all the fragilities, the vulnerabilities, the endurance, the fatigue, the strangeness of social interaction, the like hopefulness of feeling like there's a space finally where you're valued. That's in contrast to the way you're not valued in the workplace. All of these things are kind of outside of language, at least traditional language, but are within the parameters of cinematic language. And so we wanted a cinematic form that could do, intimacy really well. And we decided to make this film an observational film, a verite film, where you can feel the struggle and not just learn about it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the documentary in general, especially how the story unfolds. And as you said, the way it is made is it like filmed as a documentary verite, like we are in the story. And I was curious, did you as a director influence how the story developed? Like, did you provide any guidance or direction, sorry, during filming, or did you just stepped back and observed while filming without intervening?
Yeah, we did not really intervene. I mean, of course, we intervened on a kind of human level if things were happening that, where we could help. And I don't think we made any pretense about a kind of objectivity. We're filmmakers who we wanted them to win. We were on their side. We support the struggle. And there were some, things that happen just in people's lives. Like we have one of our subjects, Natalie, is unhoused. We learned kind of in the same time that Chris did that she was living in her car. We didn't know that right away. And so as human beings, we immediately tried to help, not to make that part of the film. That was not the aim. It was not to influence the story. It was just to say, oh no, this person is living in her car. Is there anything we can do in terms of our networks and so on, and even outside of that, like we were definitely involved in fundraising for people who were fired, and just tried to be real human beings in real relationship to the people that we cared about. But no, in terms of the struggle that unfolded, we didn't involve ourselves really in a way that had consequences for the film, and not because we think like we're not allowed as documentary filmmakers, but mostly because they didn't need us. Like there was nothing that we could offer their organizing effort that they didn't already have at their disposal. And in many ways, like we were learning from them. I'm a person who's involved in a lot of organizing campaigns myself in my own private life. And it was really influential to watch this group of organizers, and I learned a lot from them. So, yeah, I think the beauty of making a documentary film, at least for me, is the opportunity to actually learn something rather than to have a kind of vision in your head about this is the way I want it to go and this would be best for the film, and what can we do to like make that happen and to organize that drama. That's really, I mean, it's to my mind pretty unethical a lot of times, but also just not interesting. If I wanted to work that way, I would make fiction. But instead, I want to be up close to kind of a human drama, a political drama that I don't have influence over and I can learn from.
Great. So I think that it's also interesting in the movie that so much of it is in the public space and is in these public space where the ALU gathers and um is there. But there are also some moments where we enter the kind of the private lives and private homes of the characters. And besides Chris, obviously, it's not necessarily always the most maybe active in the movement. So I was wondering what the decisions were of how much to show of the private spaces of some of these people, in addition to this public area.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it sort of came down to what we really understood for us the film was about. And because so much of our interest was in kind of like the social aspect. I mean, not in terms of socializing, but in terms of like thinking about a collective as a protagonist of history. I think that we live in a society that really emphasizes individuality, and we see that reflected in our movies. These are all about main characters who are heroes or villains, uh, make, big decisions. And to our detriment in terms of kind of understanding life as not being just about, being confined to these individual units. So we wanted to make this film really about like kind of a group, so people together becoming their political selves. So that meant, really spending, we care about getting to know, that bringing the audience close to these people and letting them get to know people, but we really value the way in which you can get to know people in social context in public space. But we wanted to balance that out a little bit with some sense of what people are dealing with at home. And, I think that insofar as the film is also very much about class and race and gender and the ways in which these kinds axes of organized vulnerability really matter and affect this group of people and affect, at crucial times in this campaign, affect their ability to understand each other. We need to know a little bit about them outside of just what we witness at the tent. So then it became important to show, that Angie is a single mother doing a night shift with a little boy. We just need to know that. We need to see what that's like. We need to see her being tender and caring to her kid who's asking why she's always at the tent. Or Chris, um, and let's sort of like get a sense of like the financial difficulties he's dealing with and his children. And a lot of people have children and they're working these shifts. So we wanted to have, without overemphasizing these kind of like, a kind of character driven story of individuals apart from each other, we wanted to have some moments that just give you just enough of a sense of where people are coming from and and how that might make a difference in terms of how they're relating to each other in the organizing space.
Jumping on that, we saw during the movie that we jump between public spaces and private spaces, as you said, to get a glimpse of who they are, other than being like workers. I was wondering if were there any moments when you felt like conflicted while filming, either like ethically or emotionally, to show maybe too much or something too private of their private lives?
Well, we're as a team, I think we're very conscious and very aware of the ways in which the history of documentary film has not always been ethically sound. It's something we talked a lot about before we started filming. We talked about, constantly while filming and certainly while we're in the edit room. I think that this is something that especially plagues verite films. It's the biggest sort of criticism of verite films is that um, in the name of access and getting, close to the drama and kind of wanting drama for the sake of a compelling film, filmmakers act really unethically, and we see that all the time. And so this is just was really, really important to us to not do. And so that was a lot about, the way we committed to being conscious about that was just really respecting the boundaries that our protagonists put up, like Chris didn't want us filming at his home all the time. He's dealing with his kids and he's dealing with his life and he's trying to like be at the tent 15 hours a day. It's like you don't, like you just got other things going on. Natalie, we were very cautious with Natalie about filming with her in her car and very gentle. And if she said she didn't want that, we were totally willing to respect her boundaries. We didn't want to kind of overemphasize, like, oh, this poor person who lives in her car. There's a way in which that can become a kind of stereotype. And she, smartly is aware of that too. She said, I want people to understand that I'm an organizer. I'm not just a poor homeless woman. So like that's about like being in a kind of endless conversation with our subjects. So we both respect their boundaries and also understand what they're worried about in terms of the ways in which, you know, their, you know, they their depiction in our film could be used harmfully as well as positively. So yeah, I don't think we feel really great about what's in the film. We showed the film before completely finishing it to everyone to make sure there was no harm being done. And in some ways, some of the things we didn't get in the film are a result of us being cautious, maybe overly cautious. We would have loved to have a lot more scenes where you see an interaction between an Amazon worker who's kind of on the fence about the union in conversation with an organizer, but we didn't want to mess up their campaign. People are very scared of being fired. They feel very vulnerable about their jobs and are highly surveyed. And so we kind of like erred on the side of being too cautious rather than overly aggressive.
See. So I have kind of two questions here, kind of about the process and the scale of the project, kind of as it developed. So the first thing I'm wondering about is that how did you kind of first meet Chris, first of all? And it seemed that when this project started, the ALU wasn't as big as it got, obviously. So I'm wondering how you initially heard about the movement and if it was before it was widespread attention and what the difference was as it kind of grew.
Yeah, the ALU didn't even exist when we started the project. And
Okay.
it was our producers, Samantha and Mars, who first met and reached out to Chris long before actually Chris decided to start a union. He was in the press in the US in the early months of the COVID pandemic because he had led this walkout at JFK 8 to protest the company's lack of COVID precautions and then was fired and then became kind of a like a cause celeb for having been fired and sort of targeted by the company and he started protesting with some of the other workers that we see in the film, Derek and Gerald and Jordan. And that's when Samantha and Mars, who were both living in LA at the time, they met him at some local protests and floated the idea of making a film. This is, again, many, many months before the ALU is founded. And then they reached out to me and we started sort of developing the film, really just trying to figure out what it was. And it was while, I met Chris, I started attending these meetings of the group that he had founded at the time, which is called the Congress of Essential Workers. And and just as you do, you're developing a project, trying to figure out what it is really about, what its parameters are. And that's when Chris and these other organizer workers decided to start a union effort, which was really surprising because there had been a high profile loss just a few months before, actually weeks before, in Bessemer, Alabama. So when they decided to start their own campaign, it was really shocking and kind of amazing in how surprising it was. And that's when we decided that that would be the focus of the film.
Great. And the other question is kind of about the production side of the film. So so Stephen Meng came on after the project had started. Is that
Yeah, so we started production for a few months. I'm a Canadian citizen, so I live full time in Toronto, but I moved to New York when we started filming pretty intensively with the ALU in the spring of 2021 and moved for a few months, but I have a full-time job in Toronto and no visa status in the US. And it was very clear that it was going to be a long-term effort. And so I reached out to Steve, who is an amazing documentary filmmaker who I'm friends with and who I know from the documentary circuit. And said, "Are you interested in co-directing? I think that this is a project that, is also can really benefit from a kind of collaborative approach." And he is also like a really great cinematographer. So yeah, he jumped in about 5 months later, and then we really had Steve and our cinematographer Martin DeChico. I mean, they started just filming all the time. I was coming in and out of New York during the production process, but they were going to, between the two of them, they were in Staten Island 5 days a week, for months and months and months at a time. Because again, we're working in the observational mode. You never know what you're going to get. You have to leave the cameras on, it's like a lot of just hanging around and feeling like nothing happens. But in some ways, that's the magic. The magic is in those moments where nothing happens. And a lot of even the dramatic moments that you see in the film, the tent blowing down, the cops coming and arresting Chris, we wouldn't have gotten those if we didn't have kind of our production team there building trust, just hanging out with everyone so much of the time.
and was there maybe like a shift in kind of what you were trying to say with it as it went on, or was the kind of goal with it pretty established and consistent throughout production?
Well, I think the sort of big themes remained consistent, but of course we're learning from the film as we go, and then the actual like structure of the film shifts as real life events happen. Like we didn't know they were going to win. So that's
Yeah.
the big one, right? We didn't even know if they would get to an election. They're mounting this really, I can't overemphasize how unlikely this campaign was. They had no support from any big union. There had just been this major loss. No one had, in 20 years, no one had successfully formed a union at Amazon, and this is a scrappy group of people. So we didn't even know if they would get to an election. We certainly didn't know if they would win. And in fact, most people, almost everybody, if you ever talk to anyone in the labor movement, they said they were, they were like, predictions are they'll lose. So, um, in some ways that's really useful because then we didn't hang the whole structure of the film on like the results of the election. We hung the structure of the film on like what do we learn about what it means to try and come into or form any kind of democratic power. What does it mean to come into political consciousness in the 21st century, at the height of neoliberalism? What does it mean to be a low-wage worker in America in 2022, Um, and then things happen, So they won their election was a big one, but also it's kind of like at the same time as they won, that's when the pressure really hit. So we went from a very cohesive group of people to a group that started to have a lot of fights and disagreements. And so then there were conversations about how much to put that in the film. So those are the things that kind of evolve over time, even while some of our core, thematic interests were consistent from the very beginning.
Following up when you said how much to put into the film, I was wondering about the post-production process. So when you moved into the post-production and began assembling the first cut, were there any moments or footage that you decided to leave out, either because they felt maybe too personal to share, or because including them might have compromised someone's job or integrity?
I mean, there's lots of, we had like 700 hours of footage or something. I mean, a huge amount of footage. And it is just by definition part of the editing process to try a lot of things. I mean, there's stuff that we immediately knew we weren't going to use because it felt gratuitous, salacious, like an airing out of dirty laundry. But there were other things, there's scenes in the film where this group of people fights, and I think in a sort of different set of hands that could have been felt more manipulative, a kind of like set of gotcha scenes.
Yeah.
But we felt like, it's a process. Like, and it's a really, I mean, I love the edit. We had two amazing editors, Malika and Blair. We have, Steve and I, two directors. Our producers are very involved. Our cinematographer is very involved. So we have this rich sort of brain trust of people on the filmmaking team who are having these like long debates about like what does a scene say? How might it be interpreted in a way that isn't what we intend? What does it contribute to the overall, you know, um, story or theme of the film? So yeah, I can't name a specific scene, but there were lots and lots and lots of moments that got left on the cutting room floor.
And then I just had one last question about you mentioned that the pressure kind of goes up once the first victory is achieved. So kind of how did you decide that this project was done? Because obviously the fights continues and goes on. Like what was the how did you decide like where to end the movie, I guess?
I mean, that was probably the hardest decision. We had a
Mm,
long edit. We edited for, at least a year and a half. We submitted to Sundance before we were finished the film, which is very common. And and we had multiple endings. We had long endings. We had a cut that had, a whole hour after the victory.
mm,
And I think like, you start to lose perspective even as a filmmaking team, and that's when it becomes necessary to bring other people in and say like we're too far in it. This is what we think is going on, and then you need other people who are not in it, who are only seeing your footage saying like no, one of the things our feedback consultants would say, these were friends who were filmmakers, friends who were editors who would come in and watch a cut, like something that got said at a certain point was like when you include like the sort of long tail of the election, it feels like you've started a new movie. Like it is, I know you want to have all of the things that happened after the victory in the film, but it's really hard to do that and to do the kind of build up to the victory justice. It's like you have these two like and then you start again with a whole new thing. But we were really determined not to end with the victory. Again, we didn't want this sort of clean, feel-good narrative that's just like, that's the end, folks, all done. Like, we wanted to make a
Yeah.
film that's true to real life organizing, which is more complicated than that. So I think the idea that developed after lots and lots of workshopping was to have this kind of coda ending, which gestures to what happens, gestures to the continuation of struggle, gestures to the ways in which struggle contains victories and setbacks, but does not, move us into a whole new dramatic arc that can
Yeah.
feel um, confusing. That's very heartbreaking. We have all this amazing footage. We felt like maybe we should use it, and so we have told ourselves that maybe we'll use that footage and make a sequel to the film at a later
Okay.
date, which is sometimes something you just have to say to yourself in order to decide to end, because it's very
Mhm.
hard as a filmmaker when you're really involved in a story to end it. It can feel like, um, you know, it's
Yeah,
like you don't want to let go.
I see. Well, I think it gets a does has a good balance of where it ends,
Great.
personally.
I'm
Up to
glad.
the
Yeah, I think so too. Especially like as you said, it's true to real life. It's not like okay, the job has been done. We can like all be happy and stuff. Like there is more to do. This is just the first step. Like it's true to what happened. So yeah, it goes along with the like philosophy of the whole documentary.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
So thank you for spending your time talking about the movie here, and we're excited to have it at Verzió and more people can watch it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope
Thank you
everyone
for your
enjoys
time.
it. And thanks for chatting.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
thanks.